Welcome to part 2 in our video series covering the database connection service in Aquro that makes it easy to work with external databases directly within your app. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I strongly recommend you watch that video before continuing, as we'll build on the app that we started in that video. In this video, we'll use our database connection service to insert new items into our external database, and we'll also write a custom SQL query to filter items from the database. Let's start by first creating a page called Add Item. On this page, I'll add 3 input boxes, one for first name, one for last name, and one for email. I'll also add a button that I'll call Add. Once all components are in place, let's click to edit the click event for the button. To add a new item to our database, we'll simply need to use the Cloud DBC Table Insert coding block that will insert one item into your database. First, I'll set the external database to database, contacts as the table, and finally, I'll map our input fields to the fields in the database. I'll also add a page.load coding block to load the home page once the item has been saved to the database. Let's go ahead and try the new page by previewing this new page in the live preview and filling out our form. As you can see, the list is now updated with the new item we entered. In other words, the new item has been loaded into your external database. Updating and removing items works in the same way, so we won't be going into that in any explicit detail in this video. Now, however, let's go ahead and continue by checking out SQL queries. Queries are a way for you to execute raw SQL commands in your database, and it also gives you the option to include custom arguments in those queries. In this example, I thought we'd create a simple query to our contacts table that filters the contacts based on their first name. We'll start out by going to the database connection service and clicking on the Queries tab. Go ahead and add a new query, name it Filter Contacts, and click the query to start editing it. First, we can add an argument to this query by going to the Arguments tab and clicking on the Add button. I'll call this argument filter. The default value is the value this argument will have if we don't explicitly supply a value to it when executing the query. For this example, I'm just going to leave this blank. Now, to write the actual SQL code, I'll go back to the Query tab and type in the query. Alright, now, as I mentioned earlier, we want to filter out our contacts based on their first name. So I could write a SQL code that looks something like this. If I run this query now, you can see that I only get one row back, as we only have one item in the database with the name John. To include the value of our argument, I could simply replace John with %filter%. When executing the query, this will be replaced by the value of the argument filter. Make sense? Let's move on. The last thing we need to do before we can use the query in our actual app is to map the result of the query into our data model. Exactly as we did when we mapped the contacts table in the first video, I'll select the contact model as the model and then map the fields from the database table into the model. Just save the query and we're ready to use it inside our app. At this point, I'll go ahead and head back over to the home page and add an input box and a button to filter the content of the list. Edit the click event for the button. To execute the query we've just created, I'll use the Cloud DBC Query Collection coding block. I'll set external database as the database, filter contacts as the query, and the value of the txt filter input box to the filter argument. Finally, I'll map the collection output value to the contacts collection. What this is going to do is send the value of the text box as the filter argument to the query. The value of the returned query will then be set to our local collection contacts, which is listed in the list view. Once again, we need to ensure that the new data is loaded to the page by using the data refresh loaded coding block. And then to refresh the list, I'll use the UI component refresh coding block just as we did in the first video. After this is done, we can close the visual coding window, save the page, and then try the new filter on our page. As you can see, our list is now updated and only shows Brandon. That's me. By now, we've covered the main areas of the database connection service in Aquro, and we hope you find it useful in your app projects and that this has been helpful in learning your way around this powerful functionality. We'll see you next time.